Hello, this is Cryptolyze. I hope you are well. On this Friday, December 8, 2023, we meet today to discuss one of the cryptos that you have selected, OSMO, the Osmosis crypto. So, as usual, we're going to dissect this video into two parts. A fundamental part, we are going to come back to what osmosis is, to its role in the cosmos ecosystem, because it is very, very important to understand precisely what is happening. And then we will go to the graphs to project ourselves in the short, medium, long term on purchase prices and sale prices. And it starts right away. We will start by presenting osmosis. You have to really understand what osmosis is to understand the place it really has in the cosmos ecosystem, and the place it has really managed to give itself in the cosmos ecosystem. And you will see that it was not necessarily one at the beginning, in which osmosis originally was only a DEX, therefore a decentralized exchange, in which it carried out liquidity clustering experiments. To be frank, it's still complicated. To have liquidity that is not split, that means if I have 10 blockchains, that means that I have liquidity that will be split across the 10 blockchains, and create liquidity in one and only blockchain costs a lot, because you have to create an incentive to attract people to give their liquidity, and to lend their liquidity to the protocol to be able to evolve. And precisely, osmosis aimed to think about this notion of liquidity, this notion of unfractionated liquidity, to have common liquidity across all blockchains. And what is good is that osmosis has evolved so much, and above all has worked a lot on the notion of interchain and interoperability, which is carried by the IBC protocol, which is the interoperability protocol of Cosmos SDK, therefore from the Cosmos Development Kit. Overall, it's something that allows each of the blockchains that have been built with Cosmos SDK to interface with the Cosmos SDK. And so this allows each of these blockchains to interface in particular with osmosis and to have access to the osmosis ecosystem in order to have access to osmosis liquidity and the osmosis swap. Behind it is something which is rather classic. It is a decentralized exchange in which we also have the possibility of having a professional version decentralized exchange, where we can place our orders exactly as we would on a classic centralized platform. And even, we have others. Possibilities with other applications which are built on osmosis, such as Ivana, which allows, for example, to be able to carry out perpetual trading if one wishes, on the liquidity in particular of our friend osmosis. So it works pretty well, and it even works very well when we look at the number of developers and the number of commits we see that it doesn't stop. We have more than 1,500 commits in the month of November, which is, 2,000 commits for the month of November with active devs. So we are really on, overall, a platform and a protocol which is very active, which continues to be active whatever happens, and which is developing enormously, because the Cosmos ecosystem is really evolving, and that is really important to understand. We currently have a TVL which is 130 million, so we are a little more on the blockchain itself. We have 150, but really on the DEX, so on the decentralized application, we have 130 million, so which is rather coherent. And above all, we must understand the role of osmosis on the entire ecosystem. Thanks to the IPC protocol, this means that each of the blockchains you see here, no matter where it is based on size, can have access to osmosis liquidity and can make inter-protocol transactions to transfer liquidity. And this is what we see here from the IBC protocol on the 24 hours. We had $34 million, which is rather relatively high for an ecosystem that is developing. You have to understand that Cosmos has existed for a long time, but they are really in the process of developing IBC, therefore interchain communication, which really makes it possible to transfer funds and be able to have total liquidity on all the blockchains that have been developed with the Cosmos SDK. They've only been really pushing on this for a year and a half. And so, I think that we will have more and more volume and more liquidity, hence the interest also of osmosis. So to go even further, you have to understand that OSMO, the osmosis crypto, is widely used in airdrops. That is, you know very well that atoms, and generally all the cryptos that are on the Cosmos SDK, you must stack them on Hain, because it is possible that when a blockchain is launched, you have opportunities to recover airdrops, and we systematically ask to have at least atoms and OSMO. This is 90% of the time the case. For example, there's a new airdrop that dropped, it's Namada, and Namada required Atom and Osmosis, and in which you can collect something like 150-200 Amada depending on the volume of Cosmos that you have. We can go even much higher. So it's up to you to see if it's interesting or not. But in any case, OSMO in itself has an interest even only to farm airdrops from the COSMOS ecosystem. So there are atoms, there is OSMO, there is Axelar, there are a certain number of other blockchains, in fact, which are interesting to have their tokens stacked to be able to farm the airdrops of the new blockchains which arrive. But in fact, OSMO is really at the heart almost of 80-90 of the proposals to actually have access to certain airdrops. So to go even further, we still have a lot of news from OSMOSIS. They are in the process of merging with Yumi, which was called UX Chain, which is also a protocol which is very old in the ecosystem Cosmos. And that also means that we're going to have a giant that's going to arrive because the Yumi and OSMOSIS development teams are really big teams. So that means that we're going to have, I think, a very big project which will be instantiated as really being a liquidity hub in the Cosmos ecosystem. When I see how things move at the level of osmosis and at the level of OSMO, this is where I tell myself that the Cosmos ecosystem is really making its shift that we have been waiting for since last year. It took a little time. We talked about Cosmos 2.0, lots of things which were refused, unfortunately. Or fortunately, when we see how things are currently evolving, it is rather positive. It is progressing more slowly than expected, but in any case it is seriously progressing, and it is even accelerating behind it. Really the notion of IBC and everything is revolving around that. And I think that we will have blockchains from the Cosmos ecosystem which will be specialized on particular points, such as, for example, osmosis with liquidity. And when we look, we have Injective, which operates precisely in the ecosystem. It would not be totally aberrant to see a long-term partnership between Injective and Osmosis for liquidity management and ensuring market making. Why? No, it might be interesting to see that. This is totally hypothetical, but it is to show you that mergers are feasible, and that it is very likely in the long term to have a complete ecosystem which is semi-merged thanks to the IBC protocol, and that at the center we would have osmosis for accessibility to the liquidity of the entire ecosystem, and that would be interesting to follow later. We attack the technical part. So for this technical part, we will see several things. We will see that already, osmosis. We do not have the whole graph, but we must see that the graph, in fact, will remain relatively stable. In the 5 subsequently, in the earlier part, so it's not annoying, we're just going to base ourselves on the break that we had. We had a bearish break that was very strong. Osmosis, we see that we had something that held up enormously on the previous bull run, notably 2021 on 2022. We had a big acceleration. We had a delay, and the break of Terra Luna hurt a lot, which is logical because Terra Luna, as a reminder, existed in the ecosystem of Cosmos. And therefore, obviously we had a very bad time with everything that revolved around that. And it sank very strongly to give us a first low, which was positioned here precisely on the bearish acceleration that we had on Celsius. Celsius in June, in which we had the bearish acceleration, delay. So we had the establishment of a selling climax, the stopping of the bearish trend to form an accumulation of wick-off, and therefore after making an AR, here, taking liquidity, first liquidity intake, and then second liquidity intake with the spring. So we have an STB, we have a spring which is in progress, finally, which has been validated here, and in which we have an upward acceleration, mainly because we have an ecosystem which is waking up, because we have the establishment of a rally on BTC and on many altcoins. We are stabilizing above the rupture of the STB and above the rupture of the SC, which is rather positive but not sufficient. Okay, understand that here we have a lot of liquidity to get from the 0.9. And that for osmosis to really validate its rupture and its non-continuity of accumulation, we would have to go and break this top 2 here for start again on a bullish structure. Okay, at this point we could retrace, retest, and start going up again, okay? As long as this is not done, as long as we do not go and look for the 125.13. Well, at this moment we have no closure, and therefore we will not have validation. Real. So for the moment we are in a rally which is rather positive for the ecosystem in which we have already made good performances. If we take the lowest and we go for the highest of this part, we did 260. And we still talk about it quite little, and what is interesting is that we are still below the radar to know that we have a tokenomics which is still relatively awaiting dilution. Is at 49, I think a little bit below, of 50 dilution in terms of OSMO, so we still have downward pressure. But what is interesting to see is that we are still on a market capitalization which is around 700 million. I believe 750, maybe even a little bit 800, thanks to the acceleration of this last week. But we are in an ecosystem which is below 1 billion, and which can potentially be the heart of the liquidity of the entire Cosmos ecosystem. Okay, so for me, that's part of the assets that are a little below the radar. Yes, we have downward pressure. Yes, it can be complicated because we are still dependent on the Cosmos ecosystem. But nevertheless, we are still currently in a very interesting reloading zone for me, even if we have made an upward acceleration. For me, we remain in an interesting area. Whatever happens, we still haven't broken up. I remind you that the breakup is here. And what can we set as a target? In fact, we must understand that osmosis, if it really becomes the core liquidity of the IBC protocol, and therefore of everything that is Cosmos Hub, that implies that we will have a lot of flows and a lot of fees which will pass through osmosis. And therefore, the valuation can go very far, and we could get a valuation of 20 tau. 25. Why not 30 billion in diluted market cap? We could see an osmosis dragging around the $10-14 quite quickly if it is ever validated and confirmed with in particular the continuation of the mergers between the different protocols. We have a concentration of liquidity and a concentration of efforts that it should not be underestimated. I hope you liked this video. If so, don't forget to leave me a like and a comment. It supports the channel and above all it makes me very happy, and we'll see you tomorrow for the weekly.